What's your carnal theory?
Hi, everyone. I'm Abba.
And I'm Amanda. Today on Carnal Theory, we're sitting down with Jessica Graham of Wild Awakening. Jessica is a meditation teacher, sex, relationship, and spiritual guide for couples and for individuals, a grief and trauma resolution guide, an international speaker, and the author of Good Sex, Getting Off Without Checking Out. Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So, Jessica, if you would please share with us what you've brought for us to kick off with.
Absolutely. Sexuality, much like spirituality, is an infinite path of possibilities. When we wake up to being more than a separate solid self with a fixed location, we suffer less and sex gets a lot more interesting.
When we wake up to being more than a separate solid self with a fixed location, we suffer less and sex gets a lot more interesting. Can we start with what a separate solid self, what you are exploring when you bring that up?
Yeah, absolutely. So most people, most of the time, are walking around in what philosopher Thomas Metzinger calls a ego tunnel. So we're inside this transparent tunnel of our emotions and our mental activity. And we believe that that's what we are. And we live our life based on our thoughts and our emotions being the end all and the be all, being the truth. And with that, we are contracted down to how we perceive that experience of self. It's me, it's this body, it's this shape and this size and these beliefs and this history and this, these opinions. And that's actually just such a tiny part of what we actually are. And so through spiritual development, through consciousness exploring, we start to see that, oh, actually this transparent tunnel is just that. It's just this tunnel that I've been in since the time I started to identify with myself as solid and separate from everything else. And that's the beginning of the awakening, where we start to see, oh, maybe the fact that I can witness these emotions and these thoughts, maybe there's something more. Maybe I'm bigger than that. And then it goes all the way to, infinite spacious awareness and total unity and love, consciousness, and all of this. We can keep going. But the first step is to just realize that I am not my mind. I am not my body. They are important aspects of how I show up, the activity of this human being, but it's not all that I am. I'm actually limitless.
Okay, so we are limitless. What, in having that understanding or belief, maybe it's not a belief, maybe that's a stretch, in having that awareness and having that perception?
Sure.
What do we gain from that?
Well, you actually
other
lose
than fear, because I'm scared shitless right now.
Well, they say the cost of awakening is just everything.
Cool.
And that's been my experience. Continues to be my experience. So it's, in some ways, it's about what you lose. When we talk about a separate solid self, that's where suffering occurs. When I believe that what my partner said to me yesterday is that hurt my feelings is true, and I'm right and he's wrong, and I need to convince, and I need to get him to believe what I'm saying, that's suffering. Whereas if I'm like, oh, that's what's arising, and here's what's arising inside of me in this body, and maybe there's this aspect of it that I want to bring up into a conversation, and a lot of it is just activity, right? The suffering level goes down. Same thing, I live with chronic pain and chronic illness. The emotional and mental aspects of that are what cause the suffering, not the sensations in my body. yeah, they can be painful, but it's the way that I think about them and what I emotionally experience around them. And so, while you may lose a lot, while you may lose the things that got you high, or the ideas of who you are and like, this is me and I believe this, that can feel really good for a human. Like, I stand for this, I am this way, right? You may lose the ability to really solidify around that. What you, I guess, gain is the ability to be with everything just as it is. And when you can be with everything just as it is, you actually can take more skillful action. I like to talk about this a lot in terms of activism, right? Like, if I'm like solidified around, you're bad and you're wrong and what you're doing is awful, which it may be I may believe all of those things, but if that's the perspective and the place that I'm coming from, this contracted kind of like you and me, self and other kind of thing, it's so much harder to take skillful action, actually. It's so much harder to create positive change. And so letting go of being separate and solid, letting go of belief and opinion doesn't mean that you aren't out there in the world making powerful moves of love that sometimes are quite fierce. And it doesn't mean that you never have an argument with your partner. It's like, no, but it's about where am I coming from? Am I coming from this contracted, separate place? Or am I on some level awake to the fact that there's absolutely no separation, that you and the three of us are just one beautiful mystery. There's no separation here, really.
How do you facilitate in yourself that balance of not letting seeing these emotions and acknowledging them within you, which I think is really important, and not stepping back so far that you are kind of numb to them or ignoring what they are trying to tell you?
Such an incredibly important question. Thank you for asking it. We would call that spiritual bypassing, using the techniques and the tools to be like, well, there's no separate solid self, so it doesn't matter what I do. And my human self can be suffering and wanting to die, and I can be causing all this, harm and like issues all around, but I am one with everything, so it doesn't matter, right? Like, not the way to do this, but it does happen. And also it happens that we bypass our own emotions. And I did a lot of that actually early in my journey. And I had to start checking in every single day. Am I bypassing anything? Am I using these spiritual tools and these, awakenings that I've had to bypass my human experience? And after a while, it became a default to check in. And it hasn't happened for a while. Not to say other things don't happen, but that hasn't happened for a while. So one of the really important ingredients of not spiritually bypassing is to have teachers and peers and coaches, people who can recognize it in you and point it out, or can at least be like, okay, so at one point I was called Spock. And I went to my friend and I'm like, yeah, well, he said I was acting like Spock. And I mean, and she was like, well, do you think maybe you are acting a little like, do you think maybe you're actually avoiding your human experience? Yeah, I was. And so trusted people can be really helpful. And also not identifying with the spiritual self either. Not identifying with the sexually evolved self either. Like recognizing that these are all elements of you and none of them are that final landing place. And when we get attached, for example, if we get attached to the spiritually awakened self, then what happens when we have a really bad year, like I had a couple years ago, and we feel like we can't tell anyone because we're supposed to be so evolved, and I'm really grateful that I had teachers who really encouraged me to be transparent, to be authentic, so that when I was in this really dark place, I could get help and I could say I'm having a hard time and not feel like my ego was being dismantled because I was attached to being this person who didn't suffer or something like that. So it is really important. And when we're talking about deconstruction practices, working with self-love, self-compassion, as well as self-inquiry and really getting into acceptance around all the different parts of self is so important, because we can't see through a solid self until we see that self.
Do you have any advice or again tools to help people who are for a long time for me, I really struggled stepping back from my emotions in the moment. And I think it can be really hard to have perspective when you're feeling emotions can be so overwhelming and all-encompassing. How do you, in those moments, step back and don't let that take over your actions or what you are doing in that moment?
Yeah. So one of the main tools that I find very, very helpful is the mindfulness of self practice, which is really what I've been describing around looking at oh, there's this sensation in my body. There's these images in my mind. There's these words in my mind. And they are different strands of experience. And when I untangle them, they're not as overwhelming. Now, it can be challenging in the moment if you've never done that to just start doing it, right? So it does require practice, and definitely for people who are either embarking on non-monogamy or who are struggling in non-monogamy, this is a good daily practice to sit down and to just witness those experiences. So you're not trying to change them. You're not trying to quiet them. You're just noticing, oh, there's some mental talk, mental image. There's some emotional sensations. Stepping back, sitting in sort of a witness space and watching that activity occur, which, then allows you the ability to detangle it in the moment. And when it's not tangled up, it's less likely that we're going to, act based on the thoughts and the emotions. And we're going to be able to see more clearly what the next right action would be if there is an action. And so that's a main practice that I like to offer folks. But along with that is self-compassion. It is so important. Even if you're the most non-monogamous person on the planet, stuff can come up. You can have tender feelings arise, and it's to be able to be oh, sweetheart, this is really hard. Yeah, I'm right here with you. You're safe. I'm not going anywhere. I got you. It's like this right now. That's incredibly helpful for those moments, whether that's regarding non-monogamy or not, to be able to soothe yourself in that way and offer that compassion to yourself. And especially when it comes to areas of abandonment and trauma and neglect, which oftentimes, as I mentioned, are what's underneath of jealousy. It's really helpful to have that tool.
Well, this has been wickedly insightful.
Yeah.
I, for one, have a lot more to think about. Jessica, I'd very much appreciate it if you could read your Carnal Theory for everyone's further pondering.
Absolutely. Sexuality, much like spirituality, is an infinite path of possibilities. When we wake up to being more than a separate solid self with a fixed location, we suffer less and sex gets a lot more interesting.
May all of you chew upon this.
I have a lot of, at once I feel really invigorated and very at peace.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. I am pretty sure if you're similar to Abba and myself that this episode has given you something to reflect upon, but we'd love for you to reach out with any questions or insights for us or for Jessica on our Instagram at Carnal Theory or at My Sex Bio, and check out Jessica's work on Instagram at Your Wild Awakening or at Jessica Clark Graham and at yourwildawakening.com. Jessica, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. What a pleasure.
Carnal Theory is produced by My Sex Bio, an educational platform empowering people like you to take command of your sexual biography. Our sound design is by David Usma and theme music by Min the Universe. Video editing is by David Usma, and our assistant video editor and marketing coordinator is Maria Taruque. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify at My Sex Bio. Visit our website and join our e-letter at mysexbio.org and support our work by joining our Patreon. Thank you.